I'm going to go over how to take values from a table and then optimize for your front to back ratio using YagiCAD. So here you can see a table of pre-calculated values. These values here mean, say for the reflector, your reflector element length is going to be 0.482 times 3. And I've already pre-calculated these for a 100 megahertz frequency according to this table. 100 megahertz as 3 meters wavelength can define our antenna as such. So here we have our Yagi design. We set the frequency to 100 megahertz, and I've pre-calculated all these values. So we have, 1.446 is equal to 0.482 times 3, which is our wavelength at 100 megahertz. And we'll take a look at the pattern for this. So at 100 megahertz, this is what our pattern looks like. It's pretty good. Very minimal side lobes, excellent front to back ratio, but we want to optimize this. We want the best possible. So the easiest way to do this is to adjust one parameter as your transmission frequency. To find the optimum frequency for front to back ratio, we calculate a frequency range. And this we sweep over frequencies from 95 to 105 megahertz, and we see a peak of the front to back ratio at 102 megahertz. So we take that, change this to 102, and make sure you click outside of the box to set that value. And you go back, calculate pattern, and you see our front to back ratio has been optimized. Our rear lobe is definitely smaller. There's slightly initial phases of side lobes, but you can see that the front to back ratio has been optimized by this.
So when we test our antenna, one of the things we can do is construct a radiation pattern. Here we have our antenna set up with a transmission line connected to the driver, the feed point of the driver. And so what we'll do is we will have a receiving antenna on the other end and measure the loss, the decibel loss in power between when it comes out of the RF analyzer through this antenna to the receiving antenna and back into the RF analyzer. So what we'll do is we'll set it at 0 degrees, forward direction, measure, and then we'll rotate, set that 0 degrees, say 15, and we'll measure again, and we'll keep going, and we'll rotate and measure, and go all the way around. And the important thing to do when you're measuring the difference in gain as you go check the radiation pattern around the whole scope circle of the antenna is get back and get yourself out of the propagation field as much as possible so that you don't affect the measurements of the antenna, because the human body acts as either a reflector or an absorber of electromagnetic waves. So this setup, we have our antenna facing to the side, and the side lobe will be extending towards our receiving antenna. And so we'll measure the insertion loss with this setup and get a value in decibels. So on our RF analyzer, it's taking, it's sending out the signal to the transmitting antenna and then receiving it on the receiving antenna and measuring the insertion loss. And at 100 megahertz, which is our operating frequency, we see about 65 decibel insertion loss. We hold it at a few points, 64, 71, 69. So we have about 67 decibels of insertion loss for the side lobe. Now we've turned our antenna so the forward direction of the antenna is facing our receiving antenna. So the front lobe, which should be the peak point of the antenna's radiation pattern, is extending towards the receiving antenna. And we will measure the insertion loss at this point as well. Here we're reading the insertion loss for the forward case, and we can see about 54, 55 decibels of loss at our operating frequency. And I can just stop this. So 56, and if you remember, it was about 67 for the last one. And so that difference will be, will show the increase of gain on the forward lobe as compared to the side lobe. And we'll discuss that later. Now we turn the antenna so the rear part of the antenna is facing the receiving antenna. And we're going to use this to measure the front to back ratio of the antenna. So in addition to illustrating directivity, this will allow us to get a measure of how well the antenna applies radiation towards the front, the direction we want to go, as opposed to the back. And so for this setup, we still have the RF analyzer over there, sending out a signal through this coax cable into the transmitting antenna, and then it's transmitted to the receiving antenna, which is sitting on the chair over there, and coming back through a coax cable and received back into the RF analyzer. So now we'll check the insertion loss value for the rearward facing position. So here we're measuring the insertion loss for the backward facing direction, and this value is hovering about 58 to 60 dB. So this is actually a greater loss than what we had when we had the forward lobe pointing toward the receiving antenna when it was about 55, which indicates that the rearward direction does not propagate as far as the forward direction. And so we'll be able to take the difference in these values and come up with a forward to gain, a front to back, that is, gain ratio. So after taking the measurements out in the hall of the insertion loss, we just set up a little table, and we can see now that 55 decibels is what we measured at 0 degrees in the forward direction, and then taking 0 degrees around to the side lobe, 270, we have 67 decibels, and then in the rear direction, 59 decibels. So what we're going to do is, the least loss is in the forward direction, which is what we expected, because our radiation pattern is the greatest in the forward direction. So we're going to normalize this to 0 dB. So this becomes 0, and then each of these is going to be a negative amount below that, the difference it is with that. So this is 12 dB above in loss, so it'll read as negative 12. And then this will read as negative 4. So what that allows us to do then is we can take it to a graph, logarithmic graph, and start plotting our radiation pattern. So if we had a bunch of points, we could go all the way around here and fill that out. So at 0 degrees in the forward direction, we're at the maximum gain point, and then at 270 degrees, we have negative 12, which would put us about here, and then in the rearward direction, negative 4, we are about here. And so, as you can see, supposing it looks like that, and depending on how these points get filled out, this corresponds pretty well to a large long front lobe, a very small side lobe, and then a bit larger back lobe. So you have the front lobe, the back lobe, and the side lobe.